Okay, so picture this. You've got a community project that starts with an absolute bang. It's got the funding, it's got expert support, and a whole group of really dedicated people ready to make a huge change. I mean, it sounds like the perfect recipe for success, right? Well, what if I told you that even with all that going for it, a project can still fail and fail spectacularly? Let's dive into a story that really shows us the one crucial ingredient that can make or break a whole initiative. So let me introduce you to the Vuk'uzenzele Agricultural Project. Launched back in 1999, this thing was an absolute star. I mean, they weren't just doing well, they were being celebrated, winning awards, getting international recognition, they were feeding local orphanages, even paying dividends to their members. They had land, an irrigation system, training, all the initial support you could ask for. It really seemed like a perfect model for success. But then, this. Less than a decade later, the project was a ghost of its former self. The whole infrastructure was falling apart, the fields were overgrown, and almost everyone had left. Those awards were probably just sitting somewhere collecting dust. So the big question is, what on earth went so wrong? When you look at the timeline, it's just stark. You see the grant approval in '98, the successful launch, and then it peaks in 2000 with all those awards. But fast forward to 2009, and membership has just plummeted to 5 people. The initial money was gone, and as soon as they were left to their own devices, the whole thing just fell apart. So what can we learn from a story like this? You know, to really understand what went down, we can't just look at the highlight reel from the good years. We have to go back in, after everything has settled, and conduct what's basically a project autopsy. This is where we get to be detectives, uncovering the critical lessons that can hopefully help us avoid making the same mistakes again. Now, there's an official term for this kind of detective work. It's called an ex post evaluation. It's a formal assessment that happens after a project is all said and done. We're not just looking at boring stuff like if it was on time or on budget. We're digging way deeper to understand its real, actual long-term impact. An ex post evaluation asks a few really sharp questions. First one is the most basic. Did the project actually do what it was supposed to do? For Vuk'uzenzele, the goal was poverty relief and food security. And yeah, for a little while it did. But in the long run, the answer is a pretty clear no. Next, and this is a really critical question, we have to ask, were those early wins, the awards, the profits, a direct result of the project's design, or were they just being propped up by a constant flow of outside support and funding? That distinction is absolutely crucial. If the success disappears the second the funding does, that's a massive red flag that something at its core is just not working. And finally, we have to look at the side effects. You know, every project has these unexpected ripple effects. In Vuk'uzenzele's case, a huge, negative, unintended outcome was the creation of dependency. When that external help vanished, the project simply couldn't stand on its own 2 feet. So, after our whole investigation, what did we find? All the clues point to this one thing. The project was technically solid, right? It had the equipment, it had the training, but it was missing the single most important factor for any kind of long-term success: genuine community ownership. The community didn't truly own the project. They were just participants in someone else's plan. And this brings us to this critical concept, participation. Now, true participation is way more than just showing up to do the work. It's a fundamental shift in mindset from dependency to self-reliance. It's about giving people real power, a real voice in the decision-making process. So to avoid the same fate as the Vuk'uzenzele project, we need a totally different model. And this is where something called Participatory Monitoring and Evaluation, or PM&E, comes in. Now, this isn't a postmortem done at the end. It's a process that's baked in from the very, very start of a project. Think of it like a ladder of participation. It shows that involvement isn't just an on or off switch. At the very bottom, you've got passive participation. That's where people are basically just told what's going on. But as you climb that ladder, they get more and more power, until you reach the very top, true ownership and empowerment. At that stage, they are the ones deciding what success looks like and holding everyone accountable. The difference between the old way and the new way is just night and day. The old model, the one that led to Vuk'uzenzele's failure, was top-down. It was driven by donors and imposed on the community. It followed a rigid plan. The new PM&E model, on the other hand, is people-centered. It comes from real discussion and, most importantly, it's owned by the community itself. And that right there is the game changer. Now, this all sounds fantastic in theory, doesn't it? But actually putting it into practice is, well, it's really challenging. It's not some magic bullet you can just apply. Shifting power dynamics is complex, and there are some significant real-world hurdles to get over to make this participatory model actually work. And here are just some of those key challenges. You might be working in communities where not everyone is literate, so you need creative ways to communicate. The partner institutions might not be fully on board. The beneficiary's own views can get ignored or pushed aside. And cultural norms can tragically exclude vital members of the community, like women, from the whole process. These aren't small issues. They need active and really careful management.
So the crucial point, the big takeaway, is this. We have to completely redefine what we mean by success. It isn't about the physical stuff, the fences, the water tanks, the shiny awards on a shelf. It's about building a community's confidence, their skills, and their power to keep going long after all the outside help is gone. It's all about building the capacity for self-reliance. And that really leaves us with a critical question to think about. If a project shines brightly for a few years, but then collapses the moment the funding stops, if it creates dependency instead of empowerment, can we honestly, truly call it a success? That's something we should all probably consider.